I need you to tell me exactly how a 2017 Ram 1500, a vehicle designed to haul half a ton of brick and survive a minor apocalypse, ends up looking like it lost a street fight with a rogue steamroller after being towed 2 miles down the road, I said, trying to keep the hysteria out of my voice. It was proving difficult. Earl, the attendant behind the counter of A1 Quick Tow, didn't even look up from his ancient, grime-coated keyboard. He was a man built exclusively out of suspicion and cheap polyester, and he smelled faintly of diesel and old cheese. "I already told you, pal. We didn't damage your prize-winning truck. It's a standard wear and tear claim. Sign here, collect your keys, and get off my property." I slapped my hand on the laminate counter, producing a dull, sticky thud. "Wear and tear? Earl, you could practically fit a softball into this new dent. Last time I saw this truck, it had a flawless factory-painted fender. Now it looks like the tow truck driver used my beautiful customized Ram as a personal speed bump." Earl finally lifted his head, fixing me with a look of pure, unadulterated boredom. "Listen, Gary. We're a towing company, not a fancy car spa. Sometimes things shift. If you want a pristine vehicle, don't park where you're not supposed to. Now that'll be $250, plus the 3% fee for the inconvenience of you asking questions." The injustice of it was a physical punch to my gut. This truck, the Ram I affectionately called the Beast, was my escape, my pride. I'd spent 6 months and most of my bonus installing the lift kit and the custom exhaust. Now, one careless hoist had rendered it an embarrassing, lopsided joke. "I'm filing a claim," I announced, trying to sound authoritative, which was hard when my voice was shaking. "I'm calling your insurance, your city regulators, and probably the governor." Earl let out a short, wet laugh that managed to convey an entire career's worth of bureaucratic apathy. "Be my guest? You think you're the first guy to come in here crying over a little scratch? Read the waiver you signed. Page 6, paragraph 3, subsection B. We assume zero liability for damage incurred during non-negligent transportation, and buddy, Earl ain't negligent, just efficient." He pointed a stubby, nicotine-stained finger toward the door. "Pay up, or it's another $50 for the storage fee we'll tack on starting at 5:01 p.m. Tick-tock." I pulled out my wallet, every dollar leaving a metallic, bitter taste in my mouth. I didn't just hate Earl. I hated the whole operation, the muddy lot, the rusting chain-link fence, the sheer, brazen impunity of the place. As I drove my newly dented, financially extracted Ram out onto the road, an absurd, intoxicating thought began to bloom in my mind, a dark flower of pure spite. I glared back at the peeling, faded sign, A1 Quick Tow. "Oh, Earl," I muttered, to my bruised dashboard. "You just opened a door you won't believe." My internal fury, which had been steadily boiling since the exchange with Earl, was quickly metastasized into absolute rage the moment I pulled up to my own driveway in Harmony Meadows. I hadn't even fully engaged the parking brake before I saw it. A small, white rectangle of paper, stapled with vicious, aggressive finality, directly into the wood of my front porch column. I snatched the violation notice off the post, ignoring the painful splinter it left in my thumb. The header was in a ridiculously ornate script, declaring the sender to be the Harmony Meadows Architectural Review Committee. I skipped the formal nonsense and went straight to the infractions. Violation 1. Vehicle non-compliance. Vehicle's aesthetic condition, excessive damage, denting to front fender, is detrimental to community harmony. Section 4.3 A. Violation 2. Parking irregularity. Vehicle is parked 6 inches beyond the established curb line, causing visual distress. Section 7.1d. Violation 3. General dissatisfaction. Unscheduled. We are generally dissatisfied with your truck. Section 1.1. Spirit of the Covenant. Okay, I might have mentally edited that last one, but the first two were bad enough. And then I heard it. The faint, sickeningly cheerful snip, snip, snip of pruning shears. I looked over toward the pristine, manicured lawn of the house directly across the street. There she was, Brenda, the HOA president, the self-appointed guardian of all things aesthetically pleasing and utterly soul-crushing. Brenda was wearing expensive gardening gloves, a visor so wide it could shade a small village, and a look of saintly, self-satisfied rectitude. She was meticulously trimming a rose bush that probably had its own bylaws. "Gary," she called across the street, her voice pitched with a sickeningly sweet concern. "I saw your return. Such a shame about your truck's profile. It really does create a negative ambiance right on Willow Creek Lane." I stalked toward the curb, clutching the violation notice. "Brenda, I was just towed unjustly. My car was damaged by a Neanderthal, and I literally just got home. Could you maybe give me 5 minutes before you drop the hammer of suburban tyranny?" She gently laid her pruning shears on a wicker table, folding her hands in front of her like a kindly yet lethal schoolmarm. "It's about standards, Gary. We have high standards here. And frankly, that new dent, it's not in keeping with the historical character of the subdivision. We are a community built on curb appeal." "I'm 6 inches over the curb. My dog is bigger than 6 inches, Brenda. And the dent was caused by a massive local business failure, not by my personal decision to make my truck look like a derelict." "Well, you need to rectify it immediately, or we will be forced to move to a level 2 fine structure," she informed me, completely unmoved. "And Gary, may I just add, the position of that vehicle while you are standing here arguing with me is now violating Section 7.1.d for a second time. That's 2 separate violations in one 10-minute period. You should address this with appropriate diligence." I stared at her, seeing not just the smug, entitled neighbor, but the very embodiment of the small-scale, irritating authority that had just ruined my afternoon. My jaw tightened. The towing company damaged my property, and the HOA was going to fine me for the resulting damage. It was a perfect storm of bureaucratic overreach. "You know what, Brenda?" I took a slow, deep breath. "You and your bylaws, and that whole cesspit of a towing company that ruined my fender, you all have one thing in common. You think you're untouchable. You think the little guy has no recourse." Brenda tilted her head, a patronizing smile playing on her lips. "We just enforce the rules, dear. It's never personal." "Oh, it's about to get personal, Brenda," I muttered, turning away before I said something truly regrettable. The absurdity of the situation, the tow company damage, the immediate HOA fine, didn't just make me angry. It made me determined. The idea that had seemed insane minutes ago suddenly felt inevitable. I needed to do something that wouldn't just fix the dent, but would surgically remove the cause of both my headaches. 2 enemies, 1 ridiculously expensive solution. I walked inside, slammed the door, and opened my laptop, punching the words, "A1 Quick Tow Owner Contact." The next 48 hours of my life were a blur of spreadsheet analysis and morally ambiguous phone calls. The initial furious spark of revenge had calcified into a detailed, albeit completely insane, business plan. It turned out that A1 Quick Tow wasn't just badly managed. It was practically bankrupt. The owner, a guy named Frank, had been running it for 30 years and simply didn't have the energy to navigate the new regulations, the increasing insurance costs, or the city's demands for modern equipment. He was looking to offload the entire operation. The trucks, the city contracts, the dilapidated office, and crucially, the expansive, ugly parcel of land it all sat on. I had been saving for a down payment on a lake cabin, a serene escape from the likes of Brenda. That dream died on day one. Gary, are you out of your mind? You're going to empty your entire savings account, the retirement fund, the emergency stash, everything, to buy a towing company? And a failing one at that? That was Sarah, my financial conscience, sounding exactly like the voice of reason I was deliberately ignoring. We were on a video call, and her brow was furrowed so deeply it looked like a topographical map of disapproval. Sarah, don't call it a towing company, I countered, pacing my small living room, the laptop held awkwardly in one hand. Call it an asset-leveraged strategic acquisition. It's a vertical integration opportunity. Think of the real estate value. Gary, the real estate is an acre of gravel next to a rendering plant. Your actual goal is to have the legal authority to tow one specific woman's SUV repeatedly until she cries. You admitted this. Minor detail. Look, Frank is desperate. He's selling the entire impound lot, the business, the city contract, which, by the way, is a gold mine if managed correctly, for pennies on the dollar. It's a fire sale, Sarah. And think about the synergy. I can finally control the means of my own transportation, repair my truck with an in-house mechanic, and eliminate my single biggest source of local irritation. Revenge is not synergy, Gary. It's an expensive hobby. You're trading a 6-month HOA fine problem for a multi-million-dollar business headache. What do you know about running a tow lot? I know what I hate, I said, looking over at my truck, the ugly dent glinting under the porch light. And I hate being powerless. Promise me you'll just run the numbers on the actual contract value. If you tell me it's viable only if I stop the revenge part, I'll stop the revenge part. Deal? She sighed, the sound crackling slightly over the line. Fine. But if you end up living in the back of one of those greasy tow trucks, I'm sending you microwave dinners, not bail money. Fair enough? The numbers, surprisingly, weren't terrible. Frank was truly desperate. The price was low enough that liquidated and combined with the last remaining chunk of my savings, I could make a serious, full-cash offer. The following day, I drove the beast, dented fender and all, out to meet Frank. The office was in even worse shape than I remembered. Peeling linoleum, a perpetually buzzing fluorescent light, and a faint smell of mildew. Frank was exactly what I expected. A man worn down by 3 decades of fighting with cops, insurance agents, and belligerent car owners. He was tired, defeated, and wanted a clean break. So, Mr. Gary, Frank started, leaning back in his squeaky chair. You seem young, and perhaps a bit too cheerful for this line of work. Most people who buy tow lots look like they've seen things they can't unsee. I'm looking for an opportunity to leverage underperforming assets, Frank, I said, adopting the most serious, jargon-heavy tone I could muster. A1 Quick Tow has prime real estate, a captive city market, and a solid foundation. It just needs modern oversight and strategic capitalization. I avoided using the word revenge entirely. Capitalization. Yeah, I'm just tired of capitalizing, Frank grumbled. Look, I want the cash, I want the papers signed, and I want to be on a fishing boat by Tuesday. You got the money, kid? I have a bank draft for the full agreed amount, Frank, I confirmed, pushing the heavy envelope across the desk. But I have one non-negotiable condition I want in writing. I retain the absolute, final authority on which vehicles are towed and why for as long as I own the company. No one, not the city, not the employees, and definitely not any outside entity, can question my internal policy on that. It's a matter of management prerogative." Frank didn't even blink. He snatched the envelope and riffled through the draft. "Management prerogative. Sure, who cares? As long as the city gets their fee and the cars get moved. Sign here, kid. Congratulations. You just bought yourself a whole heap of headaches." I signed the documents, the pen scratching loud and clear on the transfer of ownership deed. The office was mine. The trucks were mine. The debt was mine. And the power, the beautiful, petty, glorious power, was mine. I stood up, shaking Frank's hand with a sincerity that was 90% real relief and 10% maniacal glee. "Thanks, Frank. I think I'll change the company name. Something punchier, something with more spirit." I walked out to my dented Ram, got in, and pulled out my phone. Opening the Maps app, I typed in one address: 142 Willow Creek Lane. "They damaged my car, so I bought the whole damn lot," I whispered, watching the dot mark Brenda's house. "Now, where does Brenda live?" "Oh, right. I own the only place her car can go." The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I stepped onto my newly acquired property. The chain-link gate, which used to seem like a barrier of bureaucratic injustice, now felt like the threshold of my own personal, petty kingdom. The first order of business: firing Earl. I found him exactly where I expected him to be, hunched over the counter, scrolling on his phone. The smell of burnt coffee and stale air trapped in the tiny office. "Morning, Earl," I chirped. Far too brightly for 7:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. He grunted, not looking up. Yeah. Frank said some suit was coming in today to look at the books. Tell him we're out of toner, and the coffee machine sounds like a dying badger." "I think I can help with both those issues, Earl. Mostly the toner, though the dying badger sound is pretty evocative." I walked around the counter, settling into Frank's old squeaky chair. I didn't sit down, though. I leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. "My name is Gary, and I'm the new owner of this operation." Earl's phone nearly slid out of his hand. He finally looked up, his eyes wide and blinking rapidly. "You? The guy with the dented pickup? You bought this whole lot?" "That's the one. Think of it as a vertical integration opportunity catalyzed by your own company's operational negligence, but you can just call it revenge." Earl scrambled to his feet, knocking his chair over. "Now wait a minute, pal. You can't just buy a business and start messing with things. I'm practically management. I've worked here 30 years. I was here when the sign was yellow. Recall?" I said smoothly. "But here's the thing, Earl. The sign is now green. And since my first official act as owner is addressing underperforming assets, I'm afraid your employment here has reached its conclusion. You are terminated, effective immediately." "Terminated? On what grounds? You can't fire me. I'm an expert. I know the city codes. I know where Frank hides the good coffee grounds." "You fired yourself the moment you denied responsibility for that softball-sized dent in my fender," I countered, pulling out a crisp envelope. "Consider this your severance package. Generous, considering I should probably be suing you for property damage. Gather your belongings. You have 20 minutes. Earl sputtered, his face cycling through indignation, disbelief, and finally, panic. "This is ridiculous! I'm calling Frank! I'm calling the labor board! You haven't heard the last of Earl!" "I sincerely hope I have," I replied, nodding toward the door. "Goodbye, Earl." He stomped out of the office, muttering threats about hexes and organized labor. The sense of justice, though petty, was deeply satisfying. Just as the door was slamming behind Earl, a hulking figure appeared in the lot, pulling off a pair of heavy work gloves. This was Lenny, the tow truck driver who had been working for Frank. Lenny looked like a retired linebacker, who had discovered a deep passion for mechanical engineering and skepticism. "Boss?" Lenny asked, his voice a low rumble. "Earl just stormed past me saying you were some kind of angry suburban wizard who bought the place just to spite him." I smiled. "That's a surprisingly accurate assessment, Lenny. Come in. I think we need to talk strategy." Lenny stepped into the office, dwarfing the cramped space. He took a seat on the only stool that looked like it might support his weight. "So, you're the new owner, Gary. Look, I'm a driver. I show up, I hook up, I drop off, I don't ask questions. I certainly don't want to be involved in any wizardry." "Lenny, I need your loyalty and your skill," I said, leaning in. "And I need you to know the real mission. We're not just A1 Quick Tow anymore. We're Justice Towing and Recovery." Lenny raised an eyebrow that was thicker than my thumb. "Justice?" The previous ownership was riddled with apathy and negligence, costing citizens time and money. My truck, for instance, was maliciously damaged by a disgruntled employee, who, by the way, is no longer employed. My mission is to reform this operation, make it profitable, and, most importantly, correct a few very specific local imbalances of power. I lowered my voice to a dramatic stage whisper. "Lenny, I acquired this entire enterprise for one central reason: to secure the legal right to tow one specific woman's car repeatedly until she acknowledges the sheer hypocrisy of her actions." Lenny stared at me for a long moment, then slowly broke into a wide, gap-toothed grin. "You bought a whole tow lot for revenge on an HOA lady?" "A tyrannical HOA lady, yes. And I need a loyal tow master. That's you. I'm doubling your salary, Lenny, but your first and most critical duty will be conducting certain special recovery operations for the new owner. It's all perfectly legal, but it will be highly irregular." Lenny scratched his beard. "Doubling the pay for irregular work, and revenge on the HOA. You know what, Gary? I'm in, but I only drive the big yellow rig. That new teal color Earl hated so much is terrible for camouflage." "Teal?" I repeated. "Lenny, that is the color of justice, and you'll love it. Now, about Brenda's house." My first week as the proud owner of Justice Towing and Recovery, the new, slightly ambitious name was already spray-painted over the old, faded sign, was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Lenny was right. The assets were underperforming. The trucks were rickety, the office was a health hazard, and the only branding we had was a faint residue of Frank's failure. This meant I had to spend money, and quickly. "I need a paint job that screams professionalism with a hint of righteous fury," I told the painter, Mark. Mark was not a typical painter. He was a small man with an immense, rambling knowledge of art history and military strategy. We were standing in the lot, looking at the two aging tow trucks. "Ah, a statement color," Mark mused, stroking his chin. "I see. We can't go with a standard utility yellow. Too passive. No fire engine red. That suggests mere urgency. For justice, we need something that speaks to the balance of law and the clarity of purpose. I suggest a hue that evokes the ancient Roman scales, perhaps a deep justice teal. It's authoritative, yet slightly whimsical, like a god who's also a comedian." "Justice teal," I confirmed, nodding vigorously. "Perfect. Get it done. And paint the lot fence the same color." "Will do, sir," Mark replied, pulling out a color swatch. "Just so you know, I will need to prime the entire surface with a coat of patience white, which, as the philosopher Seneca noted, is the foundation of all true vengeance." The dialogue was exhausting, but the color was magnificent. The trucks and the perimeter fence were quickly transformed into a startling, highly visible shade of teal. Next was the mechanical overhaul. The trucks, as Lenny delicately put it, were held together with hope and expired coupons. This required a trip to Big Tony's garage, the only mechanic in town who could work on tow rigs. Big Tony was the antithesis of Mark. He was enormous, spoke in clipped sentences, and viewed every vehicle as a personal insult to engineering. "This one," Tony grunted, slapping the fender of Lenny's main yellow rig, soon to be teal rig Alpha. "The transmission is begging for the sweet embrace of death. The winch cable is frayed, and the tires? They are less round than they are polygon adjacent." "Can you fix them, Tony? I need these trucks to be reliable. They need to be silent and efficient." "I can fix anything for money, Gary. But if you want silent and efficient, you need new. These old dogs are gonna bark." Tony paused, looking at me with squinted eyes. "So I heard you're the new owner. What kind of operation are you running?" Frank was cheap. "I'm running a highly ethical, community-focused towing service," I lied easily. "With a specific, high-priority contract. I need absolute reliability. Give me the quote for the full overhaul, including a new, silent hydraulic winch for Rig Alpha. Money is no object, within reason." Tony whistled low. "Silent winch. Someone's planning a stealth mission. Okay, I can do the work. It'll be 3 weeks, and it'll cost you the equivalent of a small European sports car. Get it done, Tony, and make sure the Justice Teal paint job doesn't chip. That paint is sacred." "Sacred teal," Tony mumbled, shaking his head as he walked away. The contractors were draining my funds, but they were also giving me the necessary arsenal. With the contractors slowly working their magic, I focused on the most critical part of the plan, the legal justification. My office cleanup uncovered Frank's dusty, massive binder of city towing regulations. I spent an entire evening immersed in the soul-crushing legalese of municipal contracts and private impound law. The key, I realized, was the inherent difference between a city-mandated tow, where the rules are rigid, and a private property tow, where the rules are set by the property owner/contractor. Since Brenda's subdivision was a private community, I had a loophole. I drafted a new supplemental policy for justice towing and recovery, which I then had notarized and logged with the state as an internal enforcement guideline. It was a single, devastating sentence, written with the self-important flourish of an HOA bylaw. Justice Towing Internal Policy. 4.B. Proximity Enforcement. Any vehicle registered to an active member of the Harmony Meadows Home Owners Association Board of Directors, when parked within the legal service boundary of the city impound contract, is deemed to be subject to arbitrary, immediate, and punitive towing enforcement at the sole discretion of the Justice Towing Chief Compliance Officer, regardless of ostensible violation status. This is necessary to ensure fair distribution of towing resources. It was nonsense, but it was codified nonsense. It didn't violate city law because it was an internal policy regarding a private contract, and it certainly wasn't violating any specific consumer protection laws, because Brenda's car, once towed, was treated just like any other car. It just got towed more often. I looked at the framed, notarized document hanging above my desk. It was beautiful. It was the perfect weapon. I had weaponized bureaucracy against bureaucracy itself. I pulled out the city map and highlighted Harmony Meadows. I traced a line from Brenda's pristine driveway to the sprawling gravel pit that was now my kingdom. My financial resources were depleted, my contractors were expensive, and I had endured 2 days of philosophical lectures from Mark. But it was all worth it. "Get ready, Brenda," I murmured, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "We tow starting tomorrow." The next morning felt like Christmas, if Santa Claus drove a massive teal-colored tow truck and delivered pure, concentrated spite. I was up before the sun, buzzing with nervous energy and the sweet anticipation of revenge. I met Lenny at the lot at 5:30 a.m. Rig Alpha, freshly outfitted with its silent hydraulic winch, gleamed in the dim floodlights, the Justice teal paint looking appropriately severe. "Ready for our first special recovery operation, Lenny?" I asked, handing him the key fob. Lenny, who was enjoying his newly doubled pay and the drama of the mission, gave me a low thumbs up. "I packed extra straps, boss, just in case Brenda's got one of those aggressive anti-towing deterrents on her SUV. "Excellent forward thinking. Remember the plan. Quiet, quick, and absolutely no verbal engagement until the vehicle is secured and off the premises. We want maximum disruption and minimum initial confrontation." We drove Rig Alpha, now surprisingly smooth and quiet thanks to Big Tony, through the still dark streets of Harmony Meadows. The silence of the suburban morning was profound. Every house was dark, every lawn immaculate. It was the perfect stage for our act of high-volume pettiness. We coasted to a stop about 50 feet from Brenda's house at 142 Willow Creek Lane. Her expensive, meticulously clean white Mercedes-Benz GLE was parked perfectly in her driveway. Too perfectly, in fact. "Violation?" Lenny whispered, checking his mirrors. I grinned, pulling out a printed form I'd created, the Harmony Meadows Violation, Special Addendum, HMVSA. "Today's infraction, Lenny, is parking too efficiently. The perfect alignment of the vehicle with the driveway is creating an unnaturally harmonious aesthetic, thereby causing disproportionate levels of jealousy among neighbors. Also, as per Justice Towing Internal Policy 4.B, we feel like it." Lenny chuckled under his breath. He was good. He moved with the practiced stealth of a man who'd spent years creeping around dark parking garages. The new winch was indeed silent. Within 90 seconds, the Mercedes was hooked, raised, and secured. "We are in possession of the asset, boss," Lenny announced, pulling out slowly and quietly. "Mission successful," I confirmed, feeling a surge of triumph. "Now back to the lot. Time for Phase 2. Bureaucratic irony." We pulled into the Justice Towing lot just as the sun was peeking. Over the horizon, we placed Brenda's SUV directly in the most prominent spot, reserved, I noted mentally, for the tyrant's trophy. I sat in my office, sipping a truly terrible cup of coffee, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At 7:05 a.m., my personal cell phone began vibrating, displaying unknown. I let it go to voicemail. At 7:15 a.m., the Impound lot phone rang. I cleared my throat, put on a pair of non-prescription reading glasses, and adopted my new phone persona. "Good morning. Thank you for calling Justice Towing and Recovery. You've reached the Chief Compliance Officer. My name is Rex. How may I assist you?" "Rex, this is Brenda Pettigrew, and you people have stolen my car." Brenda's voice was pure, undiluted screeching, loud enough to make me hold the receiver 6 inches from my ear. Lenny, who was oiling the tow hooks in the bay, looked up and mimed drinking a cup of tea. "Good morning, Ms. Pettigrew," I said, my voice dripping with the kind of syrupy, bureaucratic politeness that is specifically designed to grate on the nerves. "And I must correct you immediately. We have not stolen your vehicle. We have merely initiated a proximity enforcement recovery, as per our internal policy regarding high-value neighborhood assets." What in the blazes is a proximity enforcement recovery? And who are you? I've never dealt with a Rex before. Where is Earl? This is A1 Quick Tow, isn't it? We underwent a necessary management restructuring and rebranding 2 days ago, Ms. Pettigrew. We are now Justice Towing, and Earl is exploring other opportunities. Regarding your vehicle, the violation is clearly logged as HMVSA 001, Non-Compliant Aesthetic Harmony. Non-compliant? Are you insane? My car is spotless. It's less than a year old, and what on earth is an HMVSA 001? That, I explained patiently, pulling up a fake spreadsheet on my computer, is the Harmony Meadows Violation Special Addendum. As an active board member, your vehicle is subject to enhanced scrutiny to ensure proportional enforcement within the community. In short, your car was too perfect, creating an imbalance in the aesthetic energy of Willow Creek Lane. That's a Level 4 violation. This is harassment. I demand you release my car immediately. I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. You are, of course, free to pursue any legal recourse you deem necessary, Ms. Pettigrew, I said, trying to suppress a giggle that threatened to blow my cover. However, until the enforcement fee is paid, your asset will remain secured on our premises. The daily storage fee is set at $100, and the proximity enforcement recovery fee is $450. That brings your immediate release fee to $550. I could hear Brenda taking a sharp, choking breath. $550 for being too harmonious? I won't pay it. That is your prerogative, ma'am. However, the clock started ticking at 5:30 a.m. If the asset remains with us past 5:30 p.m., the fee will compound. Oh, and payment must be rendered in certified funds, and you must appear in person to verify your identity and sign the release waiver, which, by the way, includes an agreement that your vehicle will be subject to additional random proximity enforcement recoveries in the future. You are a monster, Rex, a bureaucratic tyrant. I am simply ensuring compliance with an equitable, if rigorous, enforcement policy, ma'am. Will you be paying today? After a long, sputtering silence that I allowed to drag out, Brenda finally spat out a defeated, "Fine, I'll be there in an hour." I hung up, put the reading glasses back on the desk, and let out a triumphant whoop. Lenny came in, wiping grease from his hands. How was the tyrant? Combustible, Lenny. Truly combustible. I watched from the office window about an hour later. Brenda did not drive up in another vehicle. She arrived in an expensive, exasperated-looking taxi. She stalked into the office, signed the release form with enough force to crack the desk, and slammed the cashier's check down. She didn't even look at me, Rex, the chief compliance officer. She just snatched her keys and hurried back out. I watched her drive her expensive, harmonious Mercedes straight out of the lot. See you tomorrow, Brenda, I whispered. The next 5 days were a blur of successful, targeted, and increasingly ridiculous enforcement. My life had devolved into an obsession. How to tow Brenda's car in a novel, legally defensible, and hilarious way every single morning. Day 2. Violation. Non-compliant tire pressure, resulting in undue curb appeal. Fine, $600. Day 3. Violation. Non-harmonious paint pigmentation. White in direct sunlight. Fine, $750. Day 4. Violation. Vehicle harbors anti-HOA sentiment. Section 1.1. Spirit of the Covenant reinforced. Fine, $850. Each day, I, as the mysterious Rex, received a phone call. Each day, Brenda's temper frayed further, and her fines grew larger. I could practically smell her mounting fury through the phone line. Lenny was having the time of his life, becoming an expert in stealth towing and inventing new, obscure violations. The neighborhood, however, was starting to notice the daily mystery of the disappearing Mercedes. On day 5, when Lenny and I were securing the car for its violation, inadequate engine vroom, a woman I recognized as Mrs. Henderson, who lived 3 houses down, emerged onto her porch. "Gary!" she whispered urgently, leaning over her railing. Is that Brenda's car?" "It is, Mrs. Henderson," I whispered back, maintaining the clandestine atmosphere. "It's the 5th day in a row. What is going on? Did she park in the wrong spot again?" "No, ma'am," Lenny interjected, securing the final chain. "This one is for misaligned rearview mirror creating an optical distortion in the streetscape. A serious offense." Mrs. Henderson gasped, but instead of horror, her expression morphed into one of wide-eyed delight. She actually pulled a camera phone out and snapped a picture. "That woman is a menace!" Mrs. Henderson hissed, suddenly emboldened. "She fined me $50 because my mailbox post was excessively rustic. You keep up the good work, son." She even handed me a warm muffin. The dialogue with the neighbors became a key part of the spectacle. I wasn't just towing a car, I was performing a public service. Word spread like wildfire. Neighbors started waiting for us, discreetly hiding behind their curtains, offering coffee and muttered encouragement. The daily disappearance of the Queen's car became the new, hilarious rhythm of Harmony Meadows. On the afternoon of day 6, the local police showed up at the lot. Officer Miller and Officer Jenkins were classic small-town police. Miller was grizzled, weary, and clearly just wanted to go home. Jenkins was young, earnest, and clutching a thick binder labeled Municipal Ordinances. "Mr. Gary," Officer Miller began, stepping out of the patrol car, "we've received multiple and increasingly volatile complaints from a resident, Ms. Brenda Pettigrew. She claims you are maliciously targeting her vehicle. Specifically, she used the words mob-style automotive terrorism. Officer, I assure you, Justice Towing and Recovery operates entirely within the strict parameters of the law and our private contract agreement with the city," I said, projecting an aura of calm, organized professionalism. I led them into the office and presented my documentation. The original transfer of ownership papers from Frank, the valid city impound contract, and most importantly, the notarized copy of my Justice Towing Internal Policy 4B. As you can see, officers, we have full discretion over private property tows within the subdivision, provided the vehicle is secured and the proper fees are assessed. Ms. Pettigrew is an active HOA board member, thus triggering the Proximity Enforcement Clause. Officer Jenkins flipped through the rule book I handed him, his face scrunching up in confusion. But disproportionate envy inducement? Is that an actual violation code? It is an internal violation code, officer, derived from the spirit of the Harmony Meadows Covenants, Section 1.1, General Aesthetic Well-Being. Ms. Pettigrew wrote those covenants. She agreed to them. And furthermore, she is paying the fines every single day. If she truly believed the tow was illegal, she would refuse to pay and seek an immediate injunction, correct? Miller sighed, running a hand over his face. She paid. Again? Yes, officer, she pays. Every day. This means, legally, she is engaging in a voluntary transaction to recover her property based on the terms of our policy. We are simply providing a service she is repeatedly purchasing. Miller looked at Jenkins, who shook his head, looking utterly defeated by the bureaucratic maze I'd constructed. Chief Miller, Jenkins mumbled. There's no statute here. It's a private business contract, and the complainant is technically consenting by paying the fee. It's the dumbest, most legal thing I've ever seen. Miller stared at my pristine, Justice teal-colored operation, then at me. Mr. Gary, I don't know what your endgame is here, but you're causing a massive administrative headache for us. Just try to use a little common sense. Common sense, officer, is the whole reason I bought this company, I replied. To combat the lack of it. Have a wonderful day. They left, defeated by the sheer, unassailable legality of my absurd revenge. I knew Brenda had reached the end of her rope. My next phone call would be from her lawyer. It wasn't her lawyer, it was Brenda herself, and she wasn't just furious. She was cold, precise, and utterly terrifying. She skipped the Rex persona entirely and called my personal cell number. "Gary?" she said, the tone low and dangerous. "I know it's you. I knew it the moment I heard that smug, simpering voice of Rex. You bought that decrepit tow lot for me. You liquidated your life savings to take petty revenge over a dented fender and an overdue fine." "It's not petty, Brenda. It's poetic," I countered. And yes, I did. You and Earl were two sides of the same irritating coin. You represent the arbitrary abuse of small, local power, and I decided to buy the source code. Poetic or not, it's illegal harassment. I am filing an injunction, a restraining order, and a massive lawsuit against Justice Towing for punitive damages and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and I've already contacted the other board members. We are initiating a community-wide boycott of your services and demanding the city pull your impound contract. A boycott, Brenda? Good luck with that. Ask Mrs. Henderson how she feels about your excessively rustic mailbox fine. And my city contract is clean. You may have the funds for litigation, but I have the truth, a notarized policy, and a highly entertained neighborhood. The next few days confirmed the split in the community. Brenda's small cabal of power-hungry HOA allies did indeed attempt to boycott, but they failed hilariously. Every time Lenny drove through Harmony Meadows to pick up Brenda's car, for reasons like improper vehicle shading and unsanctioned door handle chroming, he was greeted with cheers and applause. The confrontation came to a head at the bi-monthly Harmony Meadows community meeting. The agenda was simple: vote of censure and contract review for Justice Towing. Brenda stood at the podium, red-faced and trembling with indignation, holding up one of my absurd violation notices. "This man," she declared, pointing a shaking finger directly at me, "is terrorizing me. He is using a legitimate business to conduct a personal vendetta, costing me thousands of dollars and untold anguish. He must be stopped. We must vote to have the city contract revoked immediately." When it was my turn, I walked to the podium and brought my laptop. The ensuing discussion was less a defense and more a comedic presentation. "Good evening, neighbors," I began, smiling broadly. "Brenda is absolutely right. I did buy Justice Towing and Recovery, formerly the derelict A1 Quick Tow, with a very specific purpose. That purpose was to bring accountability to a system that felt arbitrary and broken." I clicked to the first slide, which was a close-up photo of the dent in my Ram's fender. "This dent," I narrated, "cost me $250 in illegal fees. That, and an immediate $75 HOA fine, levied by the former president for what she described as aesthetic non-compliance. I felt powerless, so I bought the source of power. Next slide, a massive detailed spreadsheet titled The Brenda Pettigrew Community Enrichment Fund. Over the last 2 weeks, Ms. Pettigrew has voluntarily paid $7,800 in fees to Justice Towing. As a thank you to the community, I have already used a substantial portion of these funds to make improvements. Slide 3, please. The next image was a brand new, beautiful Justice teal-painted gazebo in the community park that Brenda had blocked for 3 years, citing non-compliant roof pitch. That is the new gazebo, paid for entirely by the Brenda Pettigrew Fund. Slide 4. The new self-watering flower planters on the entrance arch. Slide 5. The $300 in anonymous gift cards to the residents that Ms. Pettigrew unfairly fined for things like slightly yellowing lawn and non-harmonious window trim. The room erupted not in anger, but in astonished, delighted laughter. I was turning Brenda's money directly into things the neighborhood wanted. So, neighbors, I concluded, hands spread wide. Am I harassing Brenda? Maybe a little. But am I enriching the community, cleaning up a corrupt tow lot, and using her own overreaching rules to pay for it all? Absolutely. The motion before you is to punish the man who is using the tyrant's money to build a better kingdom. I leave it up to you. The vote of censure failed 78-3. Brenda's face was a mask of cold, implacable hatred. My petty revenge had just bought me the political goodwill of an entire neighborhood. I knew my victory wouldn't be complete until she was removed from her seat of power. Brenda did not give up. True to her word, she filed the lawsuit, Pettigrew versus Justice Towing and Recovery, seeking substantial punitive damages, the refund of all her fees, and a permanent injunction against me. The courthouse was in the next county over, a bland, modern building designed to drain all humor from the human experience. I represented myself. I wasn't an attorney, but I knew the tow codes, I knew my own contracts, and crucially, I knew Brenda's personality better than her high-priced lawyer, Mr. Henderson, no relation to the muffin-giving neighbor. Mr. Henderson, who looked like a man sculpted entirely from gray flannel and disappointment, stood before the judge. A woman named Justice Caldwell, who had a reputation for being sharp and intolerant of nonsense. Your Honor, Henderson began, his voice perfectly modulated for maximum indignation. My client, Ms. Pettigrew, has been subjected to a deliberate, malicious campaign of harassment by the defendant, Mr. Gary. He purchased an entire towing business solely to create an absurd, fictional policy that targets Ms. Pettigrew's vehicle daily, forcing her to pay exorbitant, arbitrary fees under duress. That is slander, Your Honor, I interjected, stepping forward. I purchased a derelict business, invested heavily in its infrastructure, and established transparent, albeit rigorous, compliance policies, which were filed with the state. This is not harassment. This is a highly customized service that Ms. Pettigrew has, through her repeated payments, contractually agreed to receive. Justice Caldwell leaned forward, looking from Henderson to me, then back down at the stack of my meticulously compiled records. Copies of Brenda's checks, the notarized Policy 4B, and a printout of the HOA's own covenants. Mr. Gary, the judge said, her voice dry as parchment, I have reviewed your internal policy. It states that vehicles belonging to HOA board members are subject to arbitrary, immediate, and punitive towing enforcement at the sole discretion of the Justice Towing Chief Compliance Officer. That is quite specific. It is, Your Honor, I agreed, and it mirrors the spirit of Ms. Pettigrew's own HOA rulebook, which contains clauses like general aesthetic well-being and non-harmonious color palettes, allowing the board, led by Ms. Pettigrew, to levy fines based on subjective and arbitrary criteria. I simply translated her HOA management style into the towing business. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is attempting to distract from the core issue of harassment, Henderson sputtered. Overruled, Counselor. I find the defendant's interpretation illuminating, Justice Caldwell said, her mouth twitching slightly. She then directed her attention back to me. Mr. Gary, cross-examine Ms. Pettigrew. This was the part I'd rehearsed. Brenda took the stand, radiating smug certainty. Ms. Pettigrew, I began, hands clasped behind my back. In your role as HOA president, you drafted or approved most of the Harmony Meadows covenants, correct? I ensured adherence to the highest standards, yes. Did you personally fine resident Mrs. Helen Henderson for an excessively rustic mailbox post? Brenda hesitated. It was out of compliance with Section 5.3, Materials Integrity. But the rule doesn't define rustic, does it? It's subjective. You were the one who arbitrarily defined rustic as bad, correct? It was not aesthetically pleasing, she snapped. Exactly. Now, can you show me where, in the covenants, the precise limit of 6 inches beyond the established curb line is defined, the rule you used to fine my vehicle on the day of my original incident? Brenda shuffled nervously. It is implied by the need for clear street access. Implied, but not explicitly written. So, Ms. Pettigrew, your HOA rules allow you, the president, to define subjective violations and levy fines based on criteria that are implied, correct? If it ensures harmony, yes. I smiled, turning to the judge. Your Honor, Ms. Pettigrew established a legal precedent for arbitrary, subjective enforcement within her community. Justice Towing simply mirrored that precedent with a policy that applied directly to her vehicle. She cannot claim arbitrary enforcement is illegal when her entire career was built upon it. Justice Caldwell tapped her pen on the bench. Counselor Henderson, the defendant makes a compelling, if deeply infuriating, point regarding the doctrine of clean hands and subjective enforcement within the parameters of private contract law. Furthermore, the plaintiff, by repeatedly paying the fees, has essentially waived her right to claim duress in the short term. The judge didn't rule in my favor entirely, but she dismissed the core of the case, refusing to issue the permanent injunction or award the massive punitive damages. She concluded, "It appears both parties have been engaged in an extended, overly complex act of mutual aggression. Case dismissed. Settle your differences in the community. Not my court. I had won. The legal basis for my absurd revenge remained intact." Brenda returned from the courthouse defeated and humiliated, but not resigned. The moment the lawsuit was dismissed, she pivoted, escalating her tactics from legal warfare to political sabotage. She began calling emergency board meetings, pushing through votes to change the zoning to prohibit tow yards near the town limits, and working to mobilize her few remaining allies. "Gary, she's trying to fine me for the gazebo." Mrs. Henderson burst into my office one afternoon, nearly breathless. She says the Justice Teal is a disruptive color palette and that the roof pitch is 0.5 degrees off code. She's desperate, Mrs. Henderson. She's throwing Hail Marys. However, her desperation had a silver lining. It further alienated the neighborhood. The residents had seen the absurdity in court and had benefited from my Brenda Fund contributions. They were ready for a regime change. That evening, I got a text from a local resident and vocal Brenda opponent, Mr. Chen. Emergency meeting at the rec center. Topic: New candidate for HOA president. You. I walked into the rec center to find nearly 100 of my neighbors, gathered not with pitchforks, but with ballots. "Gary, we're fed up," Mr. Chen announced, standing atop a folding table. "Brenda has turned this place into a parody of itself. We need someone who fights for fairness, who isn't afraid to take on the system, and who clearly understands how the system works." "I appreciate the sentiment," I said, raising my hands, "but I just bought a towing company. I'm busy towing Brenda's car every day for non-compliant vehicle aesthetics. I don't have time to preside over landscaping disputes." "But that's why you're perfect," shouted a man from the back. "You're the only one she's scared of." The dialogue became a rapid-fire chorus of demands and appeals. "We need to update the rules, get rid of the stupid arbitrary stuff. You already know how to beat her in court. You gave us a gazebo. Think of it, Gary. You'd be the Tau King and the HOA King. Total benevolent authority." I looked out at the faces, the tired, frustrated, and now hopeful faces of my community. My initial goal had been purely selfish, vengeance for a dent, but the journey had shifted. I wasn't just Gary, the guy with the dented ram. I was Gary, the unlikely reformer. "Okay," I finally said, the word ringing through the center. "I'll do it. But my platform is simple. No more subjective rules. No more fines for things like slightly yellowing lawns. And my first act as president will be entirely dedicated to a very specific, final enforcement action." The crowd cheered. I was officially nominated. Brenda's reign was mathematically doomed. The election was a landslide. I won the HOA presidency by the widest margin in community history. Brenda received a single vote, presumably her own. I called Lenny immediately. "It's time, buddy. The grand finale. Get the rig ready. Justice Teal needs to shine." My first official act as HOA president was the final, most devastating tow. I drove the Justice Teal rig to Brenda's house one last time, with Lenny riding shotgun, camera ready. The sun was rising, casting long, dramatic shadows. "Boss, what's the violation today?" Lenny asked, pulling out the tow bar. "I was hoping for excessive display of contempt." "Better, Lenny. Today's violation is legally unappealable." I walked up to Brenda's front door and stapled the final notice. It wasn't my custom HMVSA form. It was a standard, legitimate, HOA-sanctioned notice. It read, "Violation. Failure to display required official emblem. Infraction, vehicle, 2024 Mercedes-Benz GLE, is not displaying the official Harmony Meadows HOA President-elect vehicle decal on the rear window as required by the newly passed Covenants Amendment, Section 1.5. A failure to display the decal renders the vehicle non-compliant and subject to immediate impoundment." I waited. Brenda stormed out of the house moments later, notice in hand, her face a mask of furious disbelief. "You!" she shrieked, spotting me next to the tow truck. "You actually voted on a sticker requirement, Gary? That's illegal. That's absurd." "Absurd, perhaps," I said, meeting her gaze, not with anger, but with finality. "But is it illegal? No. Section 1.5 was passed by a majority vote of the newly constituted board, the board I now lead. It's effective immediately. And here's the kicker, Brenda. You drafted the original amendment allowing the board to add new decal requirements with 72 hours notice. You wrote the code that allows me to do this." "You are a monster," she whispered, her voice finally breaking. "No, Brenda. I'm just the new president who happens to own the only tow company in town. Now, as the newly elected president, I will be working diligently to reform the rules, making them fair, transparent, and non-arbitrary. No more fines for rustic mailboxes. No more aesthetic harmony clauses. But this final tow, this symbolic act of delicious irony, must stand. Lenny efficiently hooked up the Mercedes. Brenda stood there, utterly defeated, watching her pristine vehicle lifted onto the flatbed by the Justice Teal truck. She had nothing left. No legal recourse, no political power, and no car. "Enjoy the certified funds, Gary," she hissed, pulling out her checkbook one last time. "I will," I confirmed. "I'm using this final payment to buy the beast a brand new Justice Teal painted fender. Full replacement. Thanks for the funding, Brenda." We towed her car, dropping it at the lot. She paid the fine hours later, not bothering to come into the office. She simply slipped the check under the door. She moved out of Harmony Meadows a week later, selling her house to a delightful young couple with 3 loudly barking, non-compliant dogs. The next day, I had a new, flawless fender. It was Justice Teal. 6 months later, Harmony Meadows was a genuinely pleasant place to live. The arbitrary fines were gone, replaced by reasonable guidelines. The community park was thriving, and the new gazebo, the Brenda Pettigrew Memorial Gazebo, as it was now affectionately called, was the site of weekly neighborhood gatherings. Justice Towing was surprisingly profitable. We still had the city contract, but now we actually treated the customers with respect, which, surprisingly, was a huge business advantage. I still had the desk placard that read, "Rex, Chief Compliance Officer." It was a good reminder of where I came from. Lenny and I were in the office one afternoon, reviewing the quarterly reports, which showed we were actually going to turn a decent profit this year, easily recouping my initial desperate investment. "You know, Gary," Lenny said, polishing a tow hook with fastidious care, "I never thought I'd say this, but running an ethical tow lot is kind of rewarding. Almost as rewarding as the time we towed Brenda's car for improper leaf placement." "It is," I agreed, leaning back in my squeaky chair. Though I still hold a special place in my heart for that first dent. It was the catalyst for all this unexpected success. The phone rang. It was the new HOA treasurer, a friendly guy named Mike, who had been one of Brenda's chief victims. "Hey, Gary, just confirming the budget for the new security gate. It's going to be great, really cuts down on non-resident violations." "Wonderful, Mike. Send the finalized specs over." I hung up, looking at Lenny. "See? Harmony, compliance, community." Lenny just grinned. "So, boss, now that the HOA is sorted and the tow lot is running smooth, I saw a brochure for a new municipal contract. They're looking to outsource the city's speed camera enforcement. Think of the possibilities, Gary. We could be the ones setting the speed limits." I looked over at my flawless Justice Teal Ram, parked perfectly in the lot. The dent was long gone, but the spirit of ridiculous, necessary vengeance still burned bright. "Now, Lenny," I said, picking up a pen and circling the phone number on the brochure. "That sounds like a brand new, highly profitable opportunity to enforce the spirit of the law with a little personal flair."